All right, so we should be live right about now. I'm gonna just check in to make sure everything is good.
Yep.
But yeah, I first of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time. We are here with Pan European.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a live stream nobody was waiting for.
No, but I'm really because you were just saying before we went live, you were kind of giving your background, your CV in
Yeah,
the space. But just from my perspective, I know you as just a really interesting guy from our chat, from the Blood Satellite community. And
yeah.
we've always talked in DMs and we've just chatted. And just over time, you revealed yourself to be one of the most interesting people that I know. And maybe we'll get into this today, but it's like you could go off on vacuum cleaners for like 45 minutes about the technology and the models, and it's the most enrapturing thing I've ever encountered.
I mean, this is high praise indeed. Coming from like my yeah, the host of my favorite podcast, blah 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 blah. We suck each other's dicks, but it's no. I'm very glad to be here. I'm absolutely thrilled, and unlike vacuum cleaners, this is a sort of obsession of mine. That I think the viewers might be able to get some sort of wider interest from. I have a very peculiar brain, and the way it works is I get intensely interested in things for a period of time and learn everything about it, and then kind of dump it out into the world, and then I move on to like the next interesting thing. It's a consequence of how I'm configured. And around the time I discovered the Blood Satellite podcast, I was on my vacuum cleaner arc, but I have had other arcs in the past, and the subject of this live stream, as I understand it, is about new religious movements and specifically Scientology. Now, I'll not get into that right now, but just in terms of my credentials and who I am, I I don't have any particular credentials in the space. I'm not really a content creator, but I'm one of these people who sort of gets along with everyone. I've been in the orbit of various content creators for a number of years. Most notably, if anyone does know me, I was a moderator for Millennial Woes on Telegram for a good long period of time. I've since started moderating for Blood Satellite in the Bloodsat chat, and I've kind of drifted away from Woes' orbit over the last couple of months. But that's roughly where I am. Lots of people know me, but very few people will know of me, because it's not as if I have a corpus of work for people to reference.
But you are what I believe to be the lifeblood of this entire scene, sort of the unsung heroes. Like you said, you're sort of a super node, and we discussed this the concept of nodes and graph theory in Square in the Tower. Like these individuals who kind of walk between different sectors, different groups, people who are on good terms with everybody, and that's how things get done. And you and many others in our spaces have always tried to keep a good relationship with, because a lot of the times it's you guys that keep this content alive. Like you're the ones who share links between other creators, or a lot of people forget that it's very easy for shows and content and careers to just fall off and disappear, and if no one is archiving them or keeping them alive or just keeping people in line, then this stuff goes away fast. We talked about this on our last live stream, where it's like everyone would think when I was younger that the internet is forever, and it's
Mm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
If you post something, it'll come back to haunt you. Things disappear very fast. It's pretty hard to keep data out there. And so if there's not these unsung heroes of the scene in one of the most censored environments out there, things get very quiet very fast. So anyway, enough.
Yeah,
We
sure.
started off with a bunch of cock sucking, of
No,
course, of course.
thank you ever so much for the kind words, and I just hope we can put on a good show tonight for everyone. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make sure my volume is turned up, because oh yeah, make it. I got to get closer to the mic. I'm gonna do a real Sven type thing and just fucking deep throat the mic. I shouldn't be mentioning this stuff. We got
Uh,
euthanasia in the chat. Thank you very much. They're gonna start just fucking with me, because I don't know. I've lost the ability to do audio properly. Anyway,
Yeah,
I don't want to take up too much of the time with a bunch of horse shit.
Yeah.
Like we said, you're another area of your expertise outside of all the vacuum cleaner stuff, which we may get to later, is Scientology. And I was
Yes.
surprised to learn in the past you had so much information to share in Scientology, and a lot of people, especially people my age, millennials, aging millennials, Scientology used to be a very, very big deal. It was in the zeitgeist, in popular culture. One of the
Oh
first
yeah.
big internet movements was Anonymous trying to take down
Project
Scientology.
Tanology. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, when I was living in Toronto, there was the Church of Scientology downtown. We went in there, me and some friends sometime, and we almost got audited. But that was the thing, and it's kind of fallen off. But I returned to Scientology recently. I just started thinking about it. The heyday of documentaries and exposés is over, but when we're talking about the development of religions and modern religions, the fact that Scientology is still around was fascinating to me. And it's still, might have lost some of the prestige it used to have, but it's still there. And and the longer it lasts, the more remarkable it seems to me. And I'm still
Yeah.
fascinated with, and we'll get to this in a second. And I don't want to lead you in too many directions here, but just from my perspective, this is what made me interested. Like I thought of David Miscavige, who is the current leader, and just as a figure, how interesting it is. Like he is not the prophet, but he does seem to be in charge. And just considering, kind of like the Vatican, what must the cloak and dagger palace intrigue be to this
Chairman of the board,
organization?
RTC. That is his title. The RTC is the Religious Technology Center. But Scientology has a very Byzantine corporate structure. There are a number of different organizations and corporations, all theoretically interlinked. But the two most important are the Religious Technology Center and the Church of Spiritual Technology. The Church of Spiritual Technology owns all of the copyrights, but leases them on a permanent basis to the RTC with the proviso that they can buy them back for $1 at any point. So that's supposed to be the check and balance on power, on the power of the RTC. The RTC are kind of like the church's internal enforcement arm, if you like. They police for heresy, and they're the overall organization in control of what's called the Sea Org, the Sea Organization, which is Scientology's internal space navy.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of people hear Sea Org, and especially if you've watched a film like The Master or something like that, the great Philip Seymour Hoffman portrayal, which is essentially L. Ron Hubbard. You used to, Sea Org was their ship where a lot of the crazy stuff happened, but it seems to be more important than that. But also, I wanted to start with the question: does it seem to you, from your perspective, as a perspective of an expert, that Scientology has fallen from prestige, or is it just as big and powerful as it always was?
It's difficult to say. So I think there is a critical mass which an organization or can become self-sustaining, I think, or specifically a religious organization. And what does a religious organization need to survive? It needs people. So you either need to be making people or attracting people. And Scientology isn't, as far as I know, what's called the 2D, the second dynamic, which is your sex and romantic relationships within the Sea Org. That's very much de-emphasized in favor of the 3D, which is the goals of the organization. So lots of married couples within the Sea Org don't get to spend that much time with each other. They'll be posted on different assignments and so on. And what used to be called the cadet orgs, which were essentially Scientology nurseries, they've largely been closed after a series of child abuse scandals, back in the 90s. So it's hard to say. In a sense, the church owns more property than it's ever done. There's what's called the Ideologues Project, where the various churches of Scientology have attempted to buy bigger, fancier, dilapidated old buildings and then do them up to the ideal org standard, which a lot of people interpret as a kind of real estate con. They're just kind of amassing assets and selling it to the members through the Ideal Org Project. So in terms of the assets that the church owns, it's probably never owned more. But in terms of attracting converts and making new people, I think they've got very real problems. And it would be surprising to me if the church survives in its current active form for more than a few more decades, which in a sense is quite sad. My history with Scientology. So any Scientologist listening to this, especially from the UK, will immediately be able to place me from my voice and from who I am, my kind of story. So I hope I don't get fucked with as a consequence of this. But you know, that's a small worry on the grand scheme of things. But I dropped
and also,
out.
let me just open by saying that the purpose of this talk isn't to take down or expose the Church of Scientology. Maybe quite the opposite. I'm coming at from maybe a more sympathetic perspective than other people might be used to.
Same here, absolutely. It's a cliche. People say this about every cult. People say it about Mormons. People say it about Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. But some of the best people I've ever met have been Scientologists, and I mean dedicated Sea Org members. The person who springs immediately to mind is the officer who I knew as Chris, who was the course supervisor at St. Hill during my time there, and he was just a wonderful, kind, gentle, patient man, and who was invested with a real mission. You know, he believed in what he was doing. He believed he was saving the world, and he lacked the kind of focused aggression that's typical of a lot of Sea Org members. He was just a lovely, lovely guy. The Sea Org officer in charge of the church in my hometown, she was a wonderful person. We spent many nights, you know, listening to opera music and drinking bad coffee as we try and sort out the central files, and just so many good people that I've met. But that's the thing. And Scientology, I think there is a lot of good in it, and it's a fascinating subject. It's perhaps the most elaborate belief system to ever originate from the mind of one man, L. Ron Hubbard, who is himself an enigma. You know, I could talk about this for hours, but just back to the nitty gritty. So I dropped out of university after my first year, never finished my degree, and my mental health wasn't in the best of places. So there was a period of time, let's call it 4 or 5 years, where I really struggled to hold down a job, and I had an awful lot of free time on my hands. That was the period in my life where I was perhaps the most introverted, and where I most fit your sort of typical characterization of a basement dwelling, you know, internet person. And I've always read, and I had a few charity shops that I used to go to. And then one day I found a copy of Robert Kaufman's Inside Scientology, which is a critical book written by an ex-Scientologist. So it's a guy who was from the Beat generation. He joined Scientology in its early days, and it drove him insane. And then he left the church and wrote this book about his experiences. And this was kind of my first encounter with the Church of Scientology, and the beliefs and the practices that he was describing inside it just sounded so out of this world. And it occurred to me that for someone to sincerely believe this stuff, they fundamentally inhabit a different world than I live in, you know? And my world wasn't particularly enjoyable at that time. And it's almost like the isekai anime thing, you know? It's like, by learning about this stuff, I can see the world through their eyes, and I can explore this different world, and maybe it'll be more exciting than my own. And I later kind of generalized this to include a lot of niche new religious movements. I kind of went along with every cult I could find. My best friend described it as gonzo anthropology. That was my big hobby for quite a while. I would just join cults. But I never took the plunge into Scientology. Scientology was kind of the last one. I saw that as very much the final boss. And I did. I went along one day. I took the free stress test, the Oxford Capacity Analysis. I had them reg me, short for registration, where they basically describe everything that's wrong with you and prescribe the solution, which of course is Scientology. I knew this was going to happen. You know, I knew this was the ball game. But instead of fucking with these people,
to my wife.
Yeah. Yeah, so I deliberately went along with it. I was like, right, okay, let's see where this rabbit hole leads. Let's be a Scientologist. And I ended up on the staff briefly in the org in my hometown. And then I spent a couple of months down in East Grinstead in St. Hill getting trained up for my staff position, which was in the Hubbard Communications office, which did Division 1. This is all inside baseball. It'll mean nothing to you. But
I say, like, how often do individuals who kind of just enter into the organization get allocated to the staff like that?
Not very often, but I'm me. I've always had a way with people, and you know my boundless enthusiasm. Anyone who's been in the chat when I've been on a vacuum cleaner kick can attest to how passionate I can speak about subjects, and how I've kind of got the gift of the gab, you know, and you can go so far in life just by being curious about people, like by asking questions and being really interested in the answers. And as I said, these people lived in a different world to me, and I wanted to see the world through their eyes. So I think by coming at it with this kind of open, honest, real curiosity, that was how I managed to become quite important quite quickly in the org in my hometown. And from volunteering to help tidy up the central files, that kind of led to me being appointed in the Hubbard Communications Office and being sent down south to complete my staff training. Once that was all done, and I passed what's called the student hat and my basic staff hat and the hat for my post at the org. That's by that point I'd been in Scientology for a year and change, and I'd been down south for much longer than I intended. My best friend was planning a rescue mission. You know, he was going to come down with his brother and pick me up from just outside the barracks at night and drive me back home. But it was getting a bit too hard to explain to my mother where I was going and where I was spending my time, and it was getting a bit too deep. I felt myself getting too sympathetic, because there's a point where what you do, the way you act, becomes who you are. After a while, you know, if you fake it for too long, eventually you'll make it. And I didn't want to make it. I am not a Scientologist, you know. So I got out. I wrote a disconnection letter, which is a procedure that the church uses to kind of excommunicate people. And I deliberately excommunicated myself from the church, and I emailed it to as many officers and people that I knew of, and I've never been bothered since, you know. And I was always quite sad about the way that I left, you know, but it is what it is. It was a clean break. I got what I wanted from it, and I like to think they got what, well, they certainly didn't get what they wanted from it, you know. They wanted but I like to think it was a good time for all involved, you know.
Well, I was about to ask also, how long ago was this, and have you kept up with the status of those offices? Because like I said before, I'm very curious to see over time, you know, how
that would be like keeping up with
develop.
North Korea, you know. It would be like a North Korean defector keeping up with how things are going at home. The church is its own hermit kingdom, and you really can't believe anything that it puts out about itself, you know. It operates in its own little closed world. It of all of the cults and all of the movements and organizations I've been associated with over the years, and that there has been a few in that period of my life, you know. It was my biggest hobby. The Church of Scientology is the closest to being a completely different world that you can step into. It's a modular replacement. It's a drop-in replacement for whatever your current worldview happens to be. They have Scientology equivalents of everything, you know, and that I have no means of contacting the people who I left inside. You know, I have no means of getting back into it. It was very much step through the portal and the portal closes behind you sort of dealio, you know. But this wasn't too long ago. This was, I remember, Scientology criticism experienced a big renaissance around the release of the Going Clear documentary, and a number of former church officers like Mike Rinder and Marty, what's his name? I want to say Marty Phillips, but he's not Marty Phillips. A number of them.
He's the guitarist, right? Or no,
yeah, I think
he's
so.
the author too. Fuck.
Yeah,
I think he's the author. Get Look West or something like that. Anyway,
something along those lines. Yeah, and in the wake of Going Clear, you know, a number of these blogs were launched, and Scientology criticism experienced another big renaissance. And I was in the church before that, so if you like, I was a Scientology investigator before it got cool again.
Cults are big right now, especially with women, and my sense is that it's not a sexy cult, because to be interesting to women, it needs to actually have a rapist figurehead. Like they love documentaries about pervert cults.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Scientology might be too legitimate to be cool right now. But I also remember when The Master came out, that was, I think, another surge of interest from the mainstream, because that was,
if you can believe it, I still haven't seen that. Everyone's been recommending it to me all this
I
time, but
think
I
you
see.
should, just
Yeah,
because it's one of Paul Thomas Anderson's finest movies. I think it's one of Joaquin Phoenix. Like, I'm a huge Philip Seymour Hoffman fan, so I saw it just for that reason. But
yeah,
even if you divorce it from because it doesn't outright even say Scientology once in it.
yeah.
It's very vague about the organization itself. It's just about these characters, but that movie takes a lot out of you. And it's really, really good. So I would
I
recommend it
will have
just
to
on
check it
that.
out. I am a bit of a cinephile. Yeah. So Scientology, the thing of it is, it can be approached from so many different angles. Not the least of which is the character of L. Ron Hubbard itself.
And also,
Himself,
if I
I
could
should
just
say.
interrupt you for a second to give my
Yeah.
perspective, just as
Oh,
a
yes.
complete
Sorry.
outsider
Go ahead.
and a lay person, like growing up, my experience now looking at it was I remember seeing Tom Cruise on Oprah. Or no, he was with Mike interviewing like Mike Wallace or something, and it was about psychiatry.
Yeah.
And Tom Cruise was speaking very thoughtfully and very critically about psychiatry. And I remember the consensus at the time was, look at this madman. What's he doing? What's he saying? Looking back now, if you look at that interview again, everything he said made perfect sense. He was warning about psychiatric drugs, SSRIs, about, we reviewed The Therapeutic State by Thomas Zaz on this show. Like, all that stuff was coming out of his mouth, but I don't think people were ready for it, which recontextualized all this stuff. I started looking back and saying, okay, I was told my entire life that these people are crazy and they're fascists and everything. And that's what made me just look at it again like, okay, I don't think it's that sensational as people have been saying. So that was my view of this entirely.
So I kind of get where you're coming from with that, but like I'm not here to tell you that it's not crazy. Like I've just outlined that it is a completely different world. And I hope I can maybe give a bit of insight into how true that is. But like,
and also,
yeah,
like, is it what do we call it, a cult, or like the next step of a cult? Because it's not. I wouldn't call it a religion,
no,
but
no,
it's like it's a new thing. It's a
yes,
20th century American creation, the scale of which I don't think has really existed before. I don't know what to call it, and I guess that's what fascinates me.
it's its own thing. The only thing I can compare it to is something like North Korea. You know, where you go to North Korea and you it's a divine right monarchy, but it uses all of these communist sort of motifs. As an aid to its legitimacy.
It's a spirituality that started off by making itself a state.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. And bear in mind, when we say state, it has its own corpus of law. You know, so there is a Scientology equivalent for everything. I suspect that no single writer in the English language has been as prolific as L. Ron Hubbard, just based on the sheer number of HCO bulletins, which you don't know what those are. We'll get into that. HCO policy letters, again, you don't know what those are. We'll get into it. But when we say that it's a 20th century phenomenon, just how true that is. So L. Ron Hubbard used to control the church through its network of teletype machines. You know, these ancient things before computers, where you could type a message on one keyboard, and then a keyboard on the other side of the world would type the message onto a piece of paper. You know, that's a teletyper, and they still send internal communications by telex. It's just emulated. They use like a terminal emulator to emulate the function of sending a telex, because email is non-Scientology. Ron didn't write about email; he wrote about telex. So they've implemented an electronic version of the telex system. Often very important missives and bulletins and directives and things will have the word re-mimeo at the top, which stands for re-mimeograph. When you receive this, put it through the mimeograph machine and send it along to the next door, you know, like a chain letter kind of thing, because it's in the days before photocopiers. So you never make a photocopy in Scientology. You mimeo something. You because Ron didn't write about photocopiers. Yeah.
Knowing our guys, we're talking about homesteading. I got guys talking about building mesh networks of communications again. I bet there's a lot of guys listening that like, we should get into that.
Yeah, and it's it's just so baroque. There's no words I can describe that, like to convey to you like how Byzantine everything is, and how bureaucratic. There is a HCO policy letter that covers the correct way to iron your uniform trousers. You know, there are policy letters describing the correct way to clean a room and then do a white glove inspection of the room. There do you know what I mean? How to write a letter, how to sell a book. There's a series of policy letters called the Data series, which provide you with an alternative set of logical propositions. So how to investigate a problem and find a solution to any given problem. Ron walks you through Ron's way of doing it. You know what I mean? You use the Data series. You don't think about it. You do a Data series analysis. So it's crazy. Even things like the Oxford capacity analysis, you know, the free test that they give you when they hook you up to the e-meter and ask you all these questions, that's part of a battery of standard tests that are used within the church. And they have the collective umbrella of scientometrics, not psychometrics. So, you know, in the WOG world, in our world, when we do intelligence tests or cognitive tests and things, that's psychometric testing, you know, psycho meaning mind, metric meaning measurement. It's not psychometry in Scientology, it's scientometry. So
let me ask you this: would it be fair to say that the bureaucracy itself is the attractive element of Scientology, even before the lore and everything else?
I think it might not be what gets someone to walk through the door of an org, but not many people are walking through the door in the org anymore. You know, the Div 6s, the public divisions, they're awfully, you know, it's tumbleweed city these days. It might not be what attracts anyone to the church, but once you get into that world, especially once you start serving on staff, it's certainly one of the things that keeps you there. You know, it's certainly, and the longer you exist in that space, the longer that you operate according to these interminable instructions that originated from the mind of one man, you know, the more that one man begins to supplant your own cognitive architecture and you start thinking like a Scientologist, you know.
Is that what you felt happening to you, which kind of drove you
Absolutely
away from it?
Absolutely, yes. One of the many models of Scientology, one of the many angles that you can kind of interpret it from, is it's a machine for turning you into L. Ron Hubbard. And eventually the Scientologist, the dedicated Scientologist, begins to exhibit L. Ron Hubbard's peculiarities. They share his paranoia, they share his quick anger, they share his magnetic charisma to an extent. You know, a lot of the courses and the training in Scientology focuses on communication, on the ability to, what they say, communicate with intention. You know, you begin to have some of L. Ron Hubbard's magnetic charisma. People begin to hang on your word. You can hold people's attention. You know, and yes, some critics have characterized the church as a machine for turning people into L. Ron Hubbard. You know,
which is interesting because when we talk about Islam, a lot of people don't compare it to anything like Judaism, because Judaism is obviously ethno-religious, but we had always argued that Islam is also ethno-religious. The ethnicity is Arabs. When you become Islamic, you become Arabic in your behavior. And so it's kind of amusing to think that Scientology does the same, except rather than one ethnicity, it's a single American white man, which right there might get some of our listeners on board with it.
No, it's wild, man. It's wild, and this is just one minor sort of sidetrack in the discourse. It can be interpreted so many ways. I think so. One of the critical ways that you can interpret it as well is it's L. Ron Hubbard's attempt to make himself into a god. It's kind of a magical work with the goal of making L. Ron Hubbard immortal, because as long as Scientology exists, there is this body of work that has Hubbard's name all over it. You know, there's this you know, philosophy, this way of life, this whole paradigm of how the mind works, and everything's Hubbard branded. The famous e-meter, that's the Hubbard electropsychometer. It's the Hubbard Dianetics Foundation. You know what I mean? You become a Hubbard qualified Scientologist.
One of the things I was always wondering was how significant is the image of L. Ron Hubbard in Scientology currently? And I guess that answered the question. Like, he's gotten absolutely even more bombastic over time.
He's everywhere. He is. I don't mean to hurt the feelings of, I don't know, the one Scientologist who's watching this, but like, L. Ron Hubbard is the god of Scientology. It's to an extent, it's a non-theistic believe in that there is no explicit identification of the Godhead, but the God is with you. He's the mellifluous, charismatic voice in the headphones as you listen to his pre-recorded lectures in the study room. He is the smiling, avuncular persona that beams out of you from the portrait on every wall. His name is at the top of every policy letter. HCOPL, that stands for Hubbard Communications Office Policy Letter. A HCOB is a Hubbard Communications Office Bulletin. His name is everywhere. You are in Hubbard. You are in his mind, and you are in his organization. He is the Commodore. You are helping him save the world. That's
so.
Yeah.
Because from the outside, again, speaking as a layperson, the perspective that is broadcast about Hubbard throughout the popular culture is that, oh, this guy was kind of a charlatan, or he had substance abuse problems. I don't know how much of that's true. That's kind of implied in the movie The Master as well. But internally, was there any, even at the, I don't know if you would even know this, but at the higher levels, would you speculate that
absolutely not
the boards, they believe this as well?
I think David Miscavige is a true believer. I think David Miscavige is on board. There is not one shred of hypocrisy I've detected in my time in Scientology. I can say that everyone who's in it is in it.
What do you think if they, like you had said, the recruitment might have dropped off, at least from the locations where there used to be like buildings downtown and stuff? Do you get the sense that their mission for growth is the same, or have they kind of leveled off, or what do you think their plans are?
It has to be the same because so the way Ron arranged it, the Scientology system of ethics is based on increasing metrics. So you choose a metric that you wish to expand, or in Scientology, you choose a dynamic. So it could be first dynamic, which is yourself, second dynamic, sex, third dynamic, organization, and so on. In Scientology, in Dianetics, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are only 4 dynamics. And in Scientology, it was expanded to 8, and then there might have been more dynamics discovered over time. But yeah, you select a goal, a dynamic area of expansion, and then you break it down into measurable units, and you are performing ethically as long as the line goes up. It's literally line goes up the religion. And all of the various branches and divisions within a Scientology org have their own series of goals, which were prescribed by LRH, and underpinning all of them is expansion. He describes it as bodies through the door. How many Scientologists have you made? And so they have this imperative where they really believe that getting new people is core to their mission. And a lot of the lower levels,
fascinating because it's so corporate. Like when I hear this, I'm not even trying to say it in a disparaging way, but it sounds like a mid 20th century American thing that you would hear like a manager of a car wash say. It's like, we got to get them through the door, and if you get 100 people, 20 of them will be a customer. It's like stuff you read in How to Win Friends and Influence People, these laws of persuasion.
Part of your training, if you become appointed as a Div 6 registrar, so essentially a Scientology sales rep, you're the person who gets people onto new courses. You get them to hand over their money, sign up for courses, sign up for processing, sign up for training. Part of your training is a manual from the 50s that L. Ron Hubbard really loved, and it was close to his heart. It's called Big League Sales Tactics. And L. Ron Hubbard says in one of the lectures, he says, "Oh, you got to study this book. Like it is the Bible for sales." And so in Scientology, that's the Bible for sales. Every qual library. So, sorry, that's another division. That's qualifications division. They're sort of responsible for making sure that the tech is in, that standard tech is being practiced in the org, and that you're being taught all of the right stuff. And in every church of Scientology, there is a qual library which contains all of the written works that the courses are based from. And there will be a copy of Big League Sales Tactics. The book's been out of print for years, but they have these tattered paperback copies of these sales manuals from the 50s because Ron said it was the best sales manual.
It's like Canticle for Leibowitz. Like they're just going to be not even reprinting it. They're just going to be like inscribing it in illuminated manuscripts eventually.
Quite literally. So the Church of Spiritual Technology is theoretically the highest power in the Church of Scientology. And a lot of sort of internal critics. There are lots of Scientologists who don't really believe in the direction that David Miscavige has taken the church, and they wonder why hasn't the CST exercised its power to purchase all of the trademarks back from the RTC for the sum of $1. So that was kind of, that's the fail-safe switch, and it's why aren't they doing that? And that's because David Miscavige has given them enough money to fulfill their higher purpose, which is they're buying old nuclear silos and digging great big bunkers, and they're inscribing the works of L. Ron Hubbard into granite tablets, and all of his audio lectures are being put on like gold records, like gramophone records and things.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, no joke. I'm not trying to just sound like a dumbass here, but I'm like, if I had the money, I'd be doing that with the podcast.
No, absolutely. Every word L. Ron Hubbard recorded, everything he wrote down is as we speak in at least 2 locations in the globe. There's one in America, and I think there's one in Switzerland. It's being stored in these bunkers in the event of a civilization-ending catastrophe. Let's say humanity wipes itself out, and millions of years from now, some alien species, stumbles upon planet Earth. The works of L. Ron Hubbard might be the only indication that we existed at all. That's the Church of Spiritual Technology's goal, to safeguard the tech into the billion-year future. And David Miscavige has kind of let them pursue that. He says, yeah, sure. What do you need? How much money? Here's a blank check, Can
you imagine an alien civilization discovers that, and then the second day, like, we got to find these thetans. We got to find these alien ghosts.
Well,
and also, sorry, I'll let you continue. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, no. So thetans, what are thetans? I think we've been talking for 36 minutes at this stage, and a lot of what we're doing is kind of inside baseball. Imagine if we're wrestling fans. You know how professional wrestling works, and you've got the level of kayfabe, which is the in storyline, the kind of in canon explanation of the universe and the story and why things happen the way they do. And in kayfabe, the matches are real. And then you've got the second order appreciation of professional wrestling, where it's all fake, but you get interested in the company politics and the stories of the individual wrestlers and all this sort of thing. At that moment, thus far, we've been engaging with Scientology on that kind of internal level. We've been discussing, what does it mean? What is the actual reality on the ground within Scientology? For the bulk of this chat, I would like to engage on the level of kayfabe. I would like to explain Scientology and Dianetics to you in its own terms and give you a flavor of the belief system and the key concepts within it and how it all works according to its own terms. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to keep going down that direction.
Yeah. So to answer the question, what is a thetan? We have to start with Dianetics. Dianetics never purported to be a spiritual system. It purported to be a scientific system, something along the lines of Freud's psychoanalysis, but much more effective and testable, repeatable. Ron made all kinds of grand claims about Dianetics, but the Dianetics advances a working model of the human mind where there are 3 mechanisms active inside it. There is the analytical mind, the reactive mind, and the somatic mind. We can forget about the somatic mind because Ron only mentions it a couple of times, but that's what keeps your heart beating. That's all of the automatic functions of your body. They arise within the somatic mind. It's your blink response. It's how you know when to take a shit. All that kind of the nuts and bolts of the human body, the automatic shit. The analytical mind roughly corresponds to the Freudian superego. That is the part of you that makes conscious decisions, that evaluates and makes rational judgments. And then there's the reactive mind, which is a kind of vestigial lizard brain. And in moments of pain and unconsciousness, the analytical mind gets overwhelmed and shuts down, and the reactive mind takes over. And what the reactive mind wants to do is to help you survive. So it records the negative stimulus, it records any words said during the incident, and in later life, it can get re-stimulated. So let's say you get beaten up and a black Chevy is driving past at the same time and someone's playing Despacito, so something along those lines, and you get knocked unconscious. In later life, 10 years time, Despacito comes on the radio and your heart rate increases. You begin to sweat. you might feel a pain in your abdomen and you'll start doubling over, you'll start reenacting the incident. That is the reactive mind at work. And the recording of the traumatic incident is what's known as an engram. So are you following me so far? Yeah. So the basis of Dianetic therapy is to put you in a calm emotional, a calm emotional state in a non-re-stimulating environment, and then have you relive these traumatic incidents. And often it'll start with recall a time, and you'll just say the first thing that comes into your head, and it's like, can you recall an earlier similar time? Can you recall an earlier similar time? Can you? And you follow this chain back until eventually you kind of get to a traumatic incident, and then you run it through again and again and again until it loses its emotional charge. And at the end of the session, you're supposed to have very good indicators. So the person who might have been a bit anxious and a bit not so forthcoming, they'll start smiling, they'll start laughing, and it'll be clear that this incident's no longer troubling them. And at that point, you've released the stress from the engram. The reactive mind will no longer react to the stimuli contained within the engram.
It doesn't sound that different than regular psychology or psychiatry, rather.
No, absolutely not. In fact, it's been rehabilitated by ex-Scientologists as a therapeutic paradigm called traumatic incident reduction. It's being used with some success on PTSD cases returning from the Iraq War, and a lot of sexual abuse survivors have kind of gained quite a bit of relief from this traumatic incident reduction, which, if you like, is a secular implementation of Dianetic therapy, but it doesn't retain any of the theoretical underpinnings. So from this basic model of the mind and the model of engrams and the reactive mind, we get the sense that the mind is a machine with a purpose. And what is this purpose? L. Ron Hubbard called this the dynamic principle of existence, which is encapsulated in the command to survive. So your mind is a machine that's intended to help keep you alive. And you can survive in many ways. The survival can be taken as survival of the self alone. It can be survival through sex, starting a family, reproduction. It can be survival by banding together in a group, and in these kind of outwardly expanding concentric circles of identification. And these are known as the dynamics. So the first dynamic is self, second dynamic is sex, third dynamic is group, fourth dynamic is mankind, and I think fifth dynamic is all life, or something along those lines. So that's known as the dynamic principle of existence. So you've got the three minds, you've got engrams and re-stimulation and all that jazz. You've got the dynamic principle of existence, and you also have what's called the tone scale, which was hinted at during the Dianetic phase of this belief system creation. The tone scale is basically an assessment of how well you're surviving, because how well you're surviving, it is thought, is reflected in your typical emotional state. So someone who's on top of the world, he'll be very enthusiastic. He's a go-getter. He's surviving really, really well. So he's at the top of the tone scale. He's in enthusiasm. And the idea is the closer you get to death, the more your behavior resembles death. So introversion, not wanting to talk to people, lethargy, depression, these are much lower on the tone scale. These are much closer to death. So you have these tools for evaluating someone's mental state. You follow me so far?
Yeah, and like I said, this doesn't sound like anything more than a reframing of psychology, which is interesting because Scientology, at least from my perspective, was always anti-psychiatry or I don't know, like I guess I'm trying to figure out where does it deviate from like mainstream trauma analysis.
Back in the 50s, it deviated in that it was cheap. The great promise of Dianetics was all you had to do was buy this textbook, and then you and your friend can start co-auditing each other. You can start clearing each other's reactive minds and achieving real results very quickly. Professional auditing was something like $5 an hour, whereas going to see an analyst, a Freudian analyst, that could be $50 an hour, and in 50s America, people really cared about this. It was kind of the populist thing. L. Ron Hubbard was an enormously popular pulp fiction writer as well. He wrote for Joseph Campbell's Astounding magazine, and Joseph Campbell was an early convert to Dianetics, so he helped push it forward and create the initial boom, the initial wave of interest in the model, and it kind of sold itself. L. Ron Hubbard positioned it as a drop-in replacement for mainstream psychology. So people would stop studying psychology at university and would start studying Dianetics. Does that make sense? And then when he got rejected by the scientific mainstream, that's what started the grudge that would carry through into Scientology, and ultimately, the psychologists in canon are evil creatures from another planet. They've always been opposed to the human race, even billions of years in the past, and all these different intelligent races and civilizations have arisen over millennia, and there are always psychs, there are always psychologists, waiting in the wings to kind of tear it down and control people and so on. They became the big villains. If L. Ron Hubbard is the god in Scientology, psychologists and psychiatrists are the Satan. That's how their position.
I do wonder, is that division political in any way? And this is a very vague question, but I'm wondering, could the Church of Scientology have an official political stance? Do they like certain parties or anything?
It absolutely does. There is the International Campaign for Human Rights, which is, I think it's in that. I'll have to look it up, and maybe I'll link it to you in the chat later. But they have their own political pressure groups and front organizations. Narconon is one of them, which is like a drug rehab program. But the other one is this Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights, which exists to document psychology's abuses. Like they have a lobotomy museum, for instance, and things like that. I don't think they specifically endorse any political party, but buying politicians is not banned in Scientology. They believe they should seek power actively and take it wherever they can find it.
I wonder if there could ever be a future war between Scientologists and Mormons. Do they have any position on Mormonism?
So any prior religious belief is known as an earlier system or prior practice. So once you become a Scientologist, you're supposed to discover how much more effective Scientology is and slowly abandon any former practices. So the church's official public stance is that you can be a Catholic Scientologist, you can be a Mormon Scientologist, and so on and so forth.
Really?
But the actual internal process of things, that would be impossible to maintain. It would simply be impossible for you to sincerely believe in Scientology and continue to be a practicing Mormon or whatever.
Well, it's so interesting. And, I once again reminded of David Miscavige, and, he's a bit of a, shadowy, I don't want to say shadowy figure, but not a lot is known about him. But as we have discussed, how the image of L. Ron Hubbard seems to amplify over time.
Absolutely.
Now, David Miscavige, he's very obviously true believer, and he's risen to the top of the ranks as far as I'm concerned. Like, where does he fit in all of this? Does he? Because I suppose, let me just to back up. Within Islam, within Catholicism, you obviously have the initial, founders. You have these figures early on, but over time, you also have popes, you have saints, you have reformations, you have deviations, and it kind of I don't want to say evolves, that's ironic, but it changes over time, and there's certain figures who have that power. David, could Scientology, with L. Ron Hubbard not present, could it change internally from certain figures?
So there's an ongoing program, and it's been ongoing since the 90s, called the Golden Age of Knowledge. And the idea is that, like, a lot of the things that were published of L. Ron Hubbard before had errors in it, or there were what's called squirrels, which is a Scientology heretic, someone who misapplies what's called the technology, which is the technology of Scientology. There were squirrels in the church. There were bad influences, and they moved these published works away from what Ron intended. And so a lot of things have been withdrawn pending the publishing of corrected Golden Age of Knowledge compliant versions. So that's one way that David Miscavige could sort of change things, if you like. But it's to what extent he would, because David Miscavige was part of the Commodore's Messenger org, which was early teens, predominantly female. There's no suggestion that he sexually abused any of them, funnily enough, because that's the first thing that you would expect. He was surrounded by all these nubile girls. But it seems he just genuinely enjoyed the company of young people. He was sort of a very uncharitable interpretation would be he was an energy vampire. And okay, so why are so many of them pretty and female? Well, he found girls to be more biddable. Men were more likely to kind of answer back. They were less likely to be compliant. So to be a male member of the Messenger org, you were unusual. There were very few of them. David Miscavige was one, and that means when he was a very young man, he would follow L. Ron Hubbard around, and these people used to light his cigarettes for him. They would attend on his every whim. Messengers would help him get dressed in the morning, and he would confide things to them. They're the ones who have they had the real knowledge of L. Ron Hubbard. They saw him at his most vulnerable, at his least guarded, and I think that's where Miscavige probably got imbued with his mission to take over the church. Now that Ron is gone, he's dropped the body. The church needs a leader. It can't just sort of dissolve. And he saw it as his crusade to kind of seize the reins of power. And in true Scientology fashion, he stopped at nothing to get there. There was a whole generation of officers already existing in the Sea Org hierarchy who occupied positions of power ahead of him and who were maybe better positioned to take control. And he swept them aside. In the case of Mike Rinder and this Marty, whose surname I find impossible to remember, and many others, he imprisoned them in a concentration camp in the desert called the Hole. And that's what prompted many of them to ultimately escape the organization.
Yeah,
yeah.
You would always hear stories about that, about certain people who disappeared, certain people who've just been literally imprisoned and can't leave. And then there's talk about like, no, they can leave, but they're so brainwashed that they don't want to leave. In your opinion and your research, would it literally be a concentration camp?
Yes. The Hole was awful. I have no doubt that the conditions were awful. I've seen members of the RPF. So if you get assigned a lower condition, so if you fail in like a work responsibility, or you don't meet your targets in the Sea Org, you can be assigned a lower condition, and then you're expected to work your way back up through the ethics conditions. So the worst one would be a condition of non-existence, say. But the way you work it up is you get assigned to the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force. And you've got to wear a grey rag. When you come across someone in the corridor, you've got to salute. You're not allowed to speak unless spoken to, and you do all of the dirtiest jobs. You clean lavatories with toothbrushes. You only get to eat once everyone else has finished eating, and you get the scraps. And I've seen RPF members in St. Hill, going about their responsibilities and things. And as far as I understand it, they have a relatively kind life compared to the original Sea Org, the yacht Diana and L. Ron Hubbard's small fleet of ships that he took around the Mediterranean looking for buried treasure. That's when the RPF was invented. And these people used to have to sleep down in the bilge, and just dreadful conditions. And as I said, David Miscavige was a boy in all this. He would have absorbed this as just absolutely normal practice. So when he's assigned the lower condition to all of these officers, when he's enacted his purge and sent them to the Hole, make no bones about it, it would have been a literal hole. They would have been, sleeping in shipping containers in the desert, not enough water for all of them, and all of the time they would have been expected to undergo intense processing. This was not a pleasant experience. Mike Rinder has written about it.
Yeah, and so do you suspect that the Church of Scientology has softened or changed significantly over time? No, not at all.
No, and the only reason we don't hear about it more is because all of the high-profile departures have already happened. All of the original officers have kind of who were victims of this purge have left now, and they've been very vocal. They've contributed to the Going Clear documentary. Many of them have started blogs, books have been written, and so on. So the only people left in Scientology after all of this were the hardcore of true believers, and it's smaller, but it's as fanatical as it's ever been.
Yeah, and aside from purchasing old nuclear silos and whatnot, what else are they up to? Are they expand? And you'd mentioned, I think, even before the show about buying up other real estate, or I think at the beginning of this episode. Yeah, like, are they buying up farmland? Or like, what's the type of real estate?
So what filters down to what's called the public orgs, so the non-Sea Org staff members like me, all we hear about is the Ideal Orgs project. So the Birmingham Ideal Org in this country, they bought the old yacht club, I think. No, sorry, that's the Plymouth Ideal Org. So they bought this old massive old condemned 5-star hotel that nobody could knock down because it's a listed building. It's deemed to have some architectural importance. So it's just this shell, and people have squatted in it, and there's asbestos in the roof and so on and so forth. But it's a massive building on a massive stretch of land, and that was designated to be the Plymouth Ideal Org. And the poor staff members of Plymouth have to put on their dust masks every weekend and go around to the ideologue and try and clean the place up, and none of them are qualified for it. You know what I mean? But but theoretically, at some distant point in the future, Plymouth ideologue will open, and it'll be it'll be a perfect Scientology facility. You get shown propaganda videos of like computer generated ideologues and what they look like inside and all that, and that's the dream that the Plymouth staff members are chasing. Godspeed to them, but as to what other branches of the hierarchy are up to, like, you got no idea because there are so many different corporate entities. There's Applied Scholastics, which operates Scientology schools based on L. Ron Hubbard's education philosophy. There is WISE, the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises, which teach L. Ron Hubbard's business management philosophy. There are so many of these different front groups and so on. Any or all of them could be buying farmland, and we'd have no idea.
I'll start a question, and I don't want to get you in trouble with anyone that might be listening, but it seems that L. Ron Hubbard wrote a book on everything, from law to sex to how to relationships. What's your assessment of the quality of this literature?
Sententious bombast. Dianetics is very hard to get through, and I know because I tried to read it before I took the plunge and actually joined Scientology. I tried to do as much background research as possible, so I have my weathered paperback secondhand copy of Dianetics, and I tried so hard to get through it, but it's one of these books like. Most recently, I tried to read Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and I just couldn't do it. Do you know what I mean? It was so hard to get through. And then when I joined Scientology, they call it Book One, and one of the very first things I had to do was I had to do the Book One course, the Dianetics course, and it was so hard to get through. Like, L. Ron Hubbard's written material, in contrast to his recorded lectures, it's hard going, man. It's hard going. And
I'm always trying to compare. Everyone kind of they've watched the documentaries to kind of get a sense of like the theology behind it, the thetans and whatnot. But I really want to compare that to his series of books of L. Ron Hubbard tells you how to wash your dick. L. Ron Hubbard tells you how to tie your shoes. I'm like, did you really think that carefully about all of that stuff?
So you'll never find them in books. The books are what's known as the basic books. Those are the ones that are available to the public, and they include Dianetics, Science of Survival, Scientology Fundamentals of Thought, L. Ron Hubbard's The Problems of Work, and so on. There's a very big series of them, but that's not even the tip of the iceberg. That's like 1 square millimeter on the very tip of the iceberg. But judging by those books alone, you could try to read them, and you probably wouldn't have a very good time. As you get further into the organization, you become less governed by books and more governed by what's called policy. So the HCO policy letters become important. And when you're training to be an auditor, you train according to HCOBs, HCO bulletins. And these are written in a completely different style. It was as if Hubbard was in his pulp writer persona when he was writing Dianetics, when he was paid by the penny. It was the same L. Ron Hubbard who wrote Battlefield Earth, wrote Dianetics, and it shows. But the L. Ron Hubbard that you meet in the policy letters and so on is kind of supreme 20th century bureaucrat. It's like an internal General Electric policy on switching off the lights when you leave your desk at night, that sort of thing. Or it's like that bit in Snow Crash where it describes the skater girl's mother who works for the feds and the kinds of internal communications she receives on her work computer. Laughing Man will get that reference. But it really is. It's boring. It's boring, turgid stuff.
I had a question. And this is, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this where it doesn't sound too obvious. But is there any sort of ethnic tilt towards Scientology? And the reason I ask that is because Scientology is obviously more popular in America where it was founded, but it apparently is hopped across the pond to the United Kingdom, and it makes one wonder, missionaries are so essential to Mormonism. Everyone wants to go to Africa and proselytize in Asia. Is there any interest in opening Scientology offices in India?
No.
Now what's your sense on sort of the either overt or covert ethnic policy in Scientology?
L. Ron Hubbard was a massive racist. And this is blood satellite. We don't necessarily consider that a bad thing, but The in canon, the kayfabe explanation is that Scientology is intended to make the able more able. Scientology is in the process of taking the advanced civilizations and making them even more advanced. It's not in the habit of lifting people out of the kind of primitive sludge, if you like. It's what we'll do. We'll focus on the advanced civilizations. We'll kind of, if you like, we'll get KSW in. We'll KSW keeping Scientology working. That would be a whole other tangent. But we'll get the technology in. We'll give the advanced civilizations the technology. We will create a Scientological civilization in the advanced countries, and then that'll almost automatically trickle down to the less advanced countries. That'll lift people up. I never met a non-white Scientologist in all my time.
I've never even heard of one, and that's what made me ask.
In America, Scientology briefly had a strategic alliance with the Nation of Islam. The black supremacist.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan, and stuff. But Louis Farrakhan basically turned around and stole what he saw was good in Scientology and kept it for the NOI, and rejected the mainline church. There was a fairly well publicized split, well publicized within the Nation of Islam.
That's
which
so fucking
outsiders
never
were not
heard of this.
privy to.
That's cool.
Louis Farrakhan is a Dianeticist. He believes in Dianetics. He's done a lot in his power to incorporate Scientology principles into the Nation of Islam's kind of worldview and its teachings, and to try and use it to help its members. So in a sense, there are lots of black Scientologists. They're just in the Nation of Islam. They're not in the Church of Scientology. Does that make sense?
Damn. Yeah, absolutely. I'd never heard of that before, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
And L. Ron Hubbard would be rolling in his, I don't know, space grave, whatever.
Yeah. So how did Dianetics become Scientology, and what's the difference? So we're in kayfabe, we're in canon. In the story of Scientology, Ron worked with lots of patients. He audited hundreds of people, and he was one of the very few people with the capacity to audit himself. And he noticed a curious thing. He noticed that the reactive mind contained engrams that went far, far back. Prenatal engrams. That was the first indication that there was something more there, that consciousness extended further back than we anticipated. People were getting engrams re-stimulated when they were babies in the womb and the mother bumped into the table, or they were beaten by the father, or something along those lines, and they were in the womb, they were unconscious, and they were recording, and they had engrams. So from prenatal engrams, he discovered that it went back further and further, and he found that there were engrams originating from past lives. And this is how L. Ron Hubbard discovered that reincarnation was in fact a scientific fact, and that you have lived before this life. And indeed, everyone has lived before this life. These past life, or what's known as whole track engrams from the time track. The time track is the perceptive recording of an entity's whole existence. You can imagine it literally as a roll of film that contains a recording of every event in your life from your perspective. And he followed this time track back by auditing the reactive mind, and he discovered past lives. And these stretched back, in some cases, for billions and billions of years to pre-human and even pre-Earth civilizations. And this suggested that something funny was going on, because how can this be the work of a human mind, neatly split into analytical, reactive, and somatic, when we're sometimes not even dealing with human bodies, when we're dealing with a clam's body, or an alien's body, or a synthetic robot's body, across these billions of years, there's something not quite human there. And that was the discovery of Theta. So the Theta entity is that which operates the machine. If you think of the mind as a computer with these three functions, somatic, reactive, and analytical, the Theta entity is that which sits at the computer and controls it. It is your soul, and it is an immortal energy being. That is what persists across the whole track. And it gets reincarnated in existence after existence after existence after existence, accruing engrams as it goes, you see?
Yeah.
So that is what the thetan is. You don't have a thetan. You are a thetan. You are a theta entity. You are an energy entity. You just happen to be inhabiting the body of Dimes right now.
Well, it's interesting because the consensus among, again, lay people like myself is like you're possessed by like a billion ghosts. But I guess as you're saying that, something occurred to me. and this is something we've talked about on the show recently. I'm curious, in your opinion, if you think Scientology could appeal to maybe a dissident right audience. And I'm not trying to sell it to them, but I'm saying that, we're very conscious in this political space of incursions from Muslims trying to make inroads or other groups. And as you're describing this, I'm like, wow, it sounds very aristocratic.
Yeah.
Sounds maybe very esoteric even. And I could even see this appealing to a lot of conspiracy theorists. Even I'm like, do you see there's fertile ground in this political sector for this?
Yes, but I think people are too mimetically inoculated against Scientology just because of things like Project Genealogy, because of all the high-profile defections, because of the Going Clear documentary. Pardon me, but I think no one's going to fall for it. You know what I mean? I willed myself to fall for it. I walked through that door and I'm like, I'm going to be a Scientologist. It's like the professional wrestling fan who knows that none of it's real, but you'll still go to WrestleMania, and you'll put yourself in that headspace that what I am watching will be real to me. That was the only way. Yeah,
that's what I was coming from. Where like there's so many guys in our space, grown men, who do that, who go to WrestleMania, and I'm like, could we get our greatest contrarians in the dissident right? I guess what I'm trying to say is there a 3-step process where we get Richard Spencer to be a Scientologist? Because it's already got the aristocratic, it's already got a lot of stuff in there.
It even has a series of initiatory levels that you can go through. That's the bridge to total freedom, So you level yourself up as you go along, as you take more courses, undergo more processing. There's the processing
and it's
side.
American.
There's the training
it's
side.
white. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there that I'm just anticipating. I'm like, I could see guys even from a contrarian perspective drifting over to that. And I'm not saying that's even good or bad. It wouldn't surprise me.
As a playground for the mind, I certainly found it compelling. It was a world I enjoyed visiting, and I can only speak for myself. But there's something there. And it is dangerous. I just want to get this across to you, Dimes, that it's not something you can incorporate into your worldview, or you could. But you always run the risk that it just becomes your worldview. It is so compelling, and once you're inside it, it is very hard to get out. It's such a mimetically potent thing once you're inside it.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I found so fascinating about it, because I look at something like Scientology and it does seem successful, and I think that's successful demands your attention even as a threat.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if it's only the true believers who are in there right now. What do you think those true believers might be capable of? I'm not trying to say violence or anything like that, but
you can look at what they've done in the past. You can look at Operation Snow White, which was when Mary Sue Hubbard was the leader of what was called the Guardian's Office back in the 70s and 80s. Scientology, like L. Ron Hubbard, was convinced that the U.S. government was preparing to shut him down. The IRS was coming for him. FBI was coming for him. They wanted to steal the technology. They wanted to steal all of his money. And so the Guardian's office ran Operation Snow White, where Guardian's office members would become employees. They became federal employees. They infiltrated all of this agency and began to steal paperwork relating to Scientology. It was absolutely enormous. It's perhaps the biggest espionage campaign ever perpetrated against America was perpetrated by the Church of Scientology by American citizens. And there's no reason they couldn't do that again,
Yeah, do you think the Scientology is on the radar of the CIA, the FBI, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. After Operation Snow White, they would kind of have to be. Do you know what I mean? Because they achieved more in the way of infiltration of U.S. government institutions than the Soviets ever did, They didn't accomplish very much. I just want to underpin that. The consensus is that they didn't do very much damage, but it was more the fact that they were able to do any damage at all. That was the scary thing. I would be astounded if this is not used as a case study in training, say, internal security officers. There'll be books written about this at Langley.
Well, and that's what when I think of like what would a let's say hypothetically that Scientologist agents had infiltrated Project 2025, and then Project
Yeah.
2025 therefore infiltrates the government. You could probably list of any religion, any ideology, what policies they might want to push. But I'm trying to think of what would a Scientologist policy be.
So for that, you'd have to go to the HCOPLs, and it's what do you do once you've got this power? What do you and unfortunately, the Scientology contains the seeds of its own destruction, because the only thing this power can be used for is to make money for Scientology and to keep expanding the organization, keep promoting the tech. You know, it would be very difficult for them to enact any sort of political program, because all of the HCOPL say once you've got this power, you use it to make more Scientologists. You know, it's quite limited in that sense. Yeah.
Like there's no non-obvious subversion. Like let's say they infiltrated the government, it's like day one, it's like we're gonna give all the money to the Church of Scientology. Like you would know immediately.
Or it would be, you know, say applied scholastics with L. Ron Hubbard's study technology, his educational paradigm. It's like, yeah, we're going to make that the new Common Core. Yeah, we're going to adopt L. Ron Hubbard's education. That's just how public schools in America work now. And it's like, wait a minute.
There's no subtle way to do any of this. It's like everyone's going to read L. Ron Hubbard. Entirety of America in unison is like, oh, we saw Battlefield Earth.
Yeah. Oh man, a great movie, by the way.
I saw that. You know what? I'm enough of a contrarian in my bones to want to watch that again. So you know what? It's not so bad, because I remember even as a kid seeing it and thinking, this sucks.
I also saw it as a kid, and I was enough of a contrarian to go back and watch it, and it's a good time. You know, poor John Travolta. You know, he really tried to save that movie. You should go back and watch it; it'll be fun.
Because I remember John Travolta, I'm like, he really wants to be in this movie, and he's acting the hell out of it, and looking preposterous while he's doing it.
Yeah, no, brilliant times. So. Just back to the kayfabe, you know. So we've discovered that past lives are real. We've defined what the Theta entity is. What does the Theta entity do? And when you're an immortal energy being, you know, you spend all of your time playing games, and a game to you is defining what reality is. This is where we get interesting. So Theta entities create reality, and they create reality by communicating. This seems to beg the question of what I actually mean by this, but you get a very important concept outlined in Scientology, the Fundamentals of Thought, called the ARC triangle. ARC stands for affinity, reality, and communication, and these are the three intrinsically interlinked concepts that the Theta entity is engaging in constantly. So affinity is the ability for a thetan to relate to another thetan, you know, and to like a person, to enjoy a thing, to have fun playing this game, of existence. You know, this is what you get out of playing the game. If you play the game well, you increase your affinity, you increase your enjoyment of life. Reality is, if you like, that's the rules of the game. That's the boundaries of the play space, and that is what the thetan is constantly in the process of creating. You know, the thetan postulates reality and then exists within it. That's how it amuses itself. And communication is the way by which it communicates that reality to other thetans. And so the idea is you can communicate better with someone else if you like that person, and if you are operating from the same basic set of assumptions. So if you're A and you are, your affinity and your reality are there, communication will come naturally. If you have affinity for someone, but you don't have a sense of shared reality, you can build that reality by communicating. And if you exist in the same world as someone, but you don't like them very much, then in the process of communicating with that person, affinity will grow, and you'll find yourself growing to like that person the more you communicate with them. So this is how the ARC triangle interacts. And this is how people interact with each other. So it operates on this very esoteric level. It's the thetan creating reality for itself and other thetans and participating in this great game. But also the ARC triangle is a very homespun concept. It's something you could employ in your personal relationships. Do you see how that works?
Yeah, and just as you're saying that, a question arose, and maybe you can't answer this, but do you see Scientology uniquely appealing to women over men, or do you think it's about 50-50?
Ooh, it's got
Because
something for
everything is
everyone.
about like interpersonal relationships. It's a lot of sort of psychoanalysis. It's a lot of like everything you just said. I'm like, that sounds like something, not to sound something, but something a woman would be really interested in and
Yeah,
really lead into.
absolutely. It's got, because it's so big. Like I keep saying, Scientology is a world, but it's this. It's a world. You know how the Lord of the Rings is a world. It's got its own language. It's got Elvish, and all of these things, and you could lose yourself in the lore. Or Warhammer 40,000. That's a world that you can inhabit. It's got its own, history of the future. All of these great events, the Horus Heresy, the War on Armageddon, and you can really immerse yourself in these worlds, and you can imaginatively place yourself there and take trips in it. Scientology is that to the power of a million. Scientology is a complete other world that you can go into, and in that sense, it appeals to women and men. But what's interesting is, while it has like a diverse appeal in the early stages, and you start thinking, oh, ARC, affinity reality communication, that would appeal to you sort of crystal bitches, or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
or I want to learn how to communicate better in the boardroom. I want to learn how to be an assertive, dynamic person and make good sales. That might appeal to a man. It has a similar endpoint. It starts out by appealing to all of the diversity of the human experience, and it ultimately molds you into a caricature of a high-powered 50s business executive in a naval uniform. You know what I mean? So it's like
That's
the women
so
and men
fucking interesting.
the women and men in Scientology have very similar affect. They come across as being, all of the women are very high-powered, go-getting women. All of the men are sort of strong-chinned, kind of no nonsense men. And the Sea Org is populated by examples of this specific type of people, and you suspect that none of them started out that way. You suspect that this is what Scientology has molded them into.
Honestly, and I know people are gonna laugh at this comparison, but like it sounds like you're stepping into a vault from Fallout.
Yeah, that's yes, absolutely. It's a time capsule in so many ways. I've mentioned Remimio. I've mentioned the Telex emulation network, and so
It's like this futuristic but analog technology, and everyone's got sort of like a transatlantic drawl.
Yeah, no, the way you speak changes. Like, obviously, you can tell a Scientologist from England versus a Scientologist from South Africa versus a Scientologist from America, and so on. But you eventually start to develop this transatlantic, quite neutral accent. You start talking like a 50s person, and it's crazy, man. Like all of the church officers are cast from this same mold. It is the most totalitarian memeplex that I've ever encountered.
And I know you're talking about some very deep and very fascinating things. I do have one more dumb guy question
No,
to
go ahead,
ask.
go hit me.
And we talked about their, at least implied views on ethnicity. Is there any sort of like no Jews allowed policy in Scientology?
No, but this gives me an excellent opportunity for a segue. So one of the many takes that TRS and the Daily Show got right, I was a big fan for many years, is they have their own, as far as I can tell, it's unique to TRS as well. I've never heard anyone else mention this, but the reason Scientology became so popular in Hollywood is because it acts as an alternative to the Jewish power network for Gentile actors.
No, that's what we said. We said on the show, it's like white guys just decided that they're going to do Jew too.
Yeah, so this is another one of the corporate entities within Scientology. Is called the Celebrity Center, and they act as like a talent development agency in LA. And if you're an aspiring LA actor, you can actually go to auditions run by these people, and they try and make the next Tom Cruise, they try and make the next John Travolta, Will Smith, and so on. And at one point, they had this massive stable of talent. And if you want to be one of those people, you could go along to the Celebrity Center. You could take their acting classes. You could take the communications course, and it's all founded in Scientology principles. The Com course is a very basic course in Scientology. I can get into that.
If I were an actor, I'm a white guy, and I moved there to be an actor, as many do. I'm like, just for my career, I would become a Scientologist.
Yeah, and you don't have to suck any Jew dick. You know what I mean? You don't have to get into this weird sort of sexual grubby world. All you have to do is give these people money and attend these courses. Do you understand? So that's kind of the appeal. So and in Hollywood, the Celebrity Center acts as this kind of alternative network of power, and that's one of the reasons for their staying power. And historically, that's why it attracted high-powered actors like Cruise, Kidman, Smith, Travolta.
And is that still the case? Has the celebrity side? Because I remember there was that guy from that 70s show who got embroiled in the sexual assault case, and it was back in the news, Scientology trying to help this out. Is it still popular with celebrities, do you think?
So once again, I think it's just the well's been poisoned too much. I think people have been inoculated. If memes are viruses, and a meme-plex is kind of like a family of viruses, I really do think the kind of collective population has just been inoculated against Scientology now. I can't imagine any young aspiring actors going to the Celebrity Center anymore unless they didn't know what it was,
And I know we got to get going pretty shortly, unfortunately. And I'm having such a fascinating time with this. I know. I'd love to go for 3 hours.
No, I do beg your pardon, Dimes. I might have, rambled a bit. This is my first time doing something like this.
No. This is good. But I did want to know, just on that topic, and not to endorse them in any way, but is there, in your opinion, a way they could redeem themselves or become enticing again, or to move past all of the bad press?
One can hope, but I think one hopes in the same way that, in our less guarded moments, I think every nerd wishes that Warhammer 40,000 was real. I think everyone wishes they could discover that door to Narnia in the back of the closet, because the world of Scientology is a more exciting world. It's a very romantic world. It's a world from the golden age of science fiction, with Flash Gordon and phaser guns and great battles in space, and heroes and villains. And at the core of it, there is a struggle for the future of sentient life in this universe and in all possible universes. And there was a science fiction novel written in the 80s where, at the end of your life, this is almost like a throwaway thing. This wasn't the central point of the book. I can't even remember what the book was. But the government in this world, when you're about to die, you get a hologram from your chosen religious figure. So Jesus comes and sits next to your bed and consoles the dying, or it could be Buddha and so on. And it's mentioned in an offhand way that one of those personalities could be L. Ron Hubbard. You know what I mean? And L. Ron Hubbard becomes real to you the more you listen to his recorded lectures. I've sat in those study rooms and I've listened to his voice for hours, and that was just scratching the surface. A lifelong Scientologist, a member of the Sea Org, will spend a not insignificant portion of their whole lifespan listening to this man speak to them. And there's no way for me to describe his magnetism, the charisma and the power of this man's voice. He makes you want to believe in him. And when I read that novel and I thought about the hologram of L. Ron Hubbard, I imagined myself dying, and I imagined Ron appearing at my bedside, and the things he would say, and he would make you feel special. He would say, well, you've had a good run in this body, but as you know, I went on ahead of you and I moved on to greater and bigger things at Target 2, and I've got a spot for a man just like you. You can come and be an officer in my personal guard, and we have these missions. We'll get a lot of work done together, you and me, and Scientology has this connection where you want to believe it's true. You want to believe that you have this destiny, and that this wonderful, smart, avuncular man, this kind of cheeky uncle with a wink and a nod, he can make everything okay, and he knows everything, and he believes you can do it, champ. You know what I mean? And it's that part of me that wishes that Scientology could be real. Do you know what I mean? I think that there is something in that,
Well, Christ, even this conversation, I'm a Christian, and if I'm dying, maybe I want to talk to L. Ron Hubbard. He comes up to the side of my bed, and he's like, Dimes, you did good. I loved your show. I'm like,
yeah, it would be like, I've been watching you. He would say he had this almost magnetic ability to tell people what they wanted to hear. He could be all things to all men. He would know what your great insecurity was.
It's like, what's your favorite episode? Mr. Hubbard? He's like, oh gosh, there's so many.
Yeah. It was all kayfabe, you know. It was all acting. He wouldn't actually have listened to the show, but he would tell you that he had, and you would believe it. You know, he would say, you know, I've always respected a good communicator, Dimes, and you know, I've been really busy, and you were never one of my people. You know, you've never served with me before, but every now and then I would just check up on you and see how you were doing, and you know. You did a great thing with the show. You showed how well you could communicate and so on. And how would you like to run an intergalactic television network, you know, or something along those lines?
It's like Don, and I'm just looking up. Did you hear the new sound effects? I heard the new sound effects, even the ones that were mashups. I love the mashup sound effects. No one liked them. I liked them. I heard all of them.
Yeah,
I've never
tell
been
you exactly
so
what you needed to know.
happy.
Yeah. No, seriously, and the point is, L. Ron Hubbard is one of the only men that I know. You know, I'm a Christian as well. Yeah, you know, and I anticipate judgment after I die, and all these things that I believe, and so on. But what we believe and what we'd like to believe are often two different things. You know, and L. Ron Hubbard is pretty much the only character that I know of that could make death not scary, could make death sound like something you could look forward to, and that's the power of Scientology. If I have to end on a note, let it be that. You know, like, it's impossible to understate the mimetic potency of this man and this belief system that he created. It makes you want to believe in it.
And that's what I wanted to do, was sort of crowbar ourselves out of the pop culture understanding of it, and understand that it might even be more dangerous than you originally thought. Because some people think it's this, you know, kooky, silly thing that no one cares about anymore.
That's absolutely kooky and silly. It's 100% kooky and silly, but it's the danger lies in the fact that it's kooky and silly, and your mind can reject it, but you can still want it to be real. You know?
Yeah, but it's powerful. It's still relevant. It's still there.
Yeah,
and that's why my mind begins to wander at where it could be in the future. And I would recommend to you and to anyone, just if you're a lover of film, you should really watch The Master. And I've seen it a couple of times. I saw it in theaters when it came out, and I watched it again just apropos of nothing the other day, just because I like Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. I'm like, it reveals itself more upon every viewing, and I actually think it treats the subject matter pretty fairly, I think. And just hearing you describe L. Ron Hubbard as this really dominant, charismatic figure, I think that comes across in the film as well.
Yeah. I maintain I'm currently seeding a massive torrent of pretty much every lecture L. Ron Hubbard ever recorded. So I don't listen to it. I'm not a Scientologist. I don't put it on when I'm in the car. That's when I listen to Blood Satellite. But I just have them, you know, as a data hoarder thing. If anyone's knocking about in the Bloodsat chat after this, I'll try and select a particularly compelling lecture and upload it just to give you a taste of what it's like to listen to the man. And he's got this uncanny knack where it seems like he's talking to you personally, you know, down through the decades. He could be talking about the wildest shit imaginable, but it's, you know, it's your old Uncle Ron. He's letting you in on this secret. It's really, it's magic, you know, and it's black magic and it's dangerous magic, but this was his magic, you know.
It's one of these characteristics of very influential people that there's they lock in on you. And they said that about Tom Cruise too, like working with Tom Cruise, that when you're talking to him, he doesn't seem fake. He doesn't seem like a Hollywood guy. He makes you feel like you're the only person in the universe when he's like one-on-one with you. And I think that's, if you possess that power, and I think it has to, I don't think it comes naturally. I think it has to be almost an extreme empathy. It's not psychopathy. It's not like a mental illness. Like it's an extreme and willing connection to humanity in a sense.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, we haven't even touched on like half of the stuff that I wanted to. We didn't get quite into the nuts and bolts of the belief system. We didn't get into the crazy details of Hubbard's life.
I suppose to come back.
But you know, Scientology was just the final boss of my big quest into other worlds. I've sojourned with the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, Hare Krishnas, the Hercolubus Society, the Raelians. Like in this 4 or 5 year period where I didn't have a job, I had an awful lot of time on my hands, and I've been associated with many cults and crazy out there societies and so on, and I'd be more than happy to talk about any one of them any time you struggle to find someone else to come on a live stream. So
no. Oh, I did struggle because this is the type of thing I want to do more with the Coprano Society, because we've had some big names on the interviews, some people I always wanted to speak to, but I've always had the best time. And everyone says the best interviews are ones like these, with people that I know or people who would just have something like an area of expertise that they're fascinated in. And so I have no doubt that this is going to be one of our top talks, because
well, you know, and pan-European's head grew 3 sizes that day.
Yeah, like and everyone's got like everyone says like their favorite reviews are like when I'm talking to like Zoltanis or something. It's these big names that I'm like, oh, this is a real get. No one gives a shit.
To date, the I confess I'm not the very best Blood Satellite fan. I've listened to almost every episode of the podcast that I've been able to lay my hands on, but in terms of live streams, I think the Zoltanis ones are the only ones I've listened to. So definitionally, those are my favorite. You know, we love you, Zolt.
Yeah, well, and like him, people giving their experiences, like him going into his history with Adam Waffen, and going into the type of stuff like you've read about on the Daily Stormer, for example, but like the actual stuff. I'm like, that's worth its weight in gold to me.
He's just got this tremendous talent to be kind of like, in a sense, in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was on Iron March as Adam Waffen, and the 09 stuff was getting big, you know.
He's like, honestly, Zolt is like the Forrest Gump of like the far right. Like he's just popping up everywhere. He's like, yeah, I was there, like as everyone was getting swept up, and like he renounces it. He's not anywhere. He's still kind of involved in these other interesting groups, but. And he was
never a Scientologist, though. At least to our knowledge, he was never a Scientologist. So I've got that on Zolt. If anyone is into the 09A stuff as well, you know, the and Aleister Crowley and the Ordo Templo Orientis, the whole Thelema thing. There was a connection with L. Ron Hubbard and that as well. For a brief period of time, Hubbard was associated with Jack Parsons of the Jet Propulsion Lab, and he stole his bitch. His second wife was Sarah Northrop, who was originally Jack Parsons' mistress. So he cooked Jack Parsons and stole all of Jack Parsons' money, and then shortly afterwards, Jack Parsons committed suicide. But in his brief association at Jack Parsons' house, Hubbard was initiated into Thelema and tried to help Jack Parsons create the Moonchild. So this was this wild pre-Scientology, pre-Dianetics occult chapter of L. Ron Hubbard's life that we didn't get into. But another time.
We got even more listeners like this guy. He knew what he was up to. Anyway, we got to end there. Once again, this is an amazing time. I've got your handle on Telegram at the bottom here. Trust the Pan.
There's the only other thing I could possibly share is Pan's Picks, which is my own little channel. I don't know what impression the listeners might have of what my channel could possibly be. But it's probably not what you're expecting. It's mostly videos of machines that I'm interested in. So that's where all the vacuum thing is.
I'm a subscriber. Why the fuck aren't you people?
But no, love the show, Dimes. Thank you for everything that you do, and give my regards to the family and to Judas and Judas's family. And it was an absolute pleasure to be here. I only hope that the listeners got something out of it.
And we will have you back soon to discuss the other stuff. All right, everyone, Thank you for tuning in, everyone. This is an impromptu sudden stream. Once again, couldn't get it fucking working on X. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to be posting the completed upload there anyway. So